I will fight to the death. But a shoe? They were literally running in circles. A penecony hater, and I am emotionally invested. I would never. Trust me, I was also very shook. There was no plot to spoil you guys. They got me. Hi friends, it's another month. That means it's another monthly wrap up. This month though, I'm going to try to keep it short, concise, and to the point. And without any further ado, let's hop right into the data and the statistics for this video. For the month of October, I read a total of 15 books, totaling around 4,105 pages. Now let's take a quick look at the reading breakdown per day. As you guys can see on the screen, the first half of the month has a higher average page per day than the second half of the month, mostly because the second half of the month, I took a couple of breathers days after I finish a book or a novel or a series to recollect my thought, take a little bit of a break before starting a new book. Now the shocker for the month of October has to be my average star rating. The average star rating for the month of October is 3.6, which is a whole half a point lower than quarter 1, quarter 2, and quarter 3. Taking a look at the rating distribution, as you guys can see on the screen, I actually rated 2 books at 1 star, and this time around I definitely had a much more even distribution between 3 stars, 4 stars, and 5 stars. I'm going to keep you guys in the suspense as to what the 1-star books is going to be by talking about the amount of money I saved this month. This month, I saved a total of $136.34, which is on average how much I saved in the past couple of months. Most of my reads this month were from the library, specifically audiobooks from the library. So it isn't surprising to me to see that audio dominates at a solid 60% in my reading format for the month of October, with digital coming in second and last place being physical. Again, we can see a similar pattern being reflected in the reading types, with audio dominating once again. But what is surprising is I have 0 ebooks read for the month of October. And the last piece of data I have coming in at no one's surprise, romance is number 1 at around 26%, followed by historical, and last but not least, mystery. But then you can hear about my spiel about mystery in my quarter 3 reading wrap up, where mystery should be considered more as a mood and not necessarily the mystery genre. And finally, for the month of October, I did not finish 2 books, Charming the Duke of the North and Ruthless Vows. Now you guys can see how much progress I made on both of them. At this point, I have finished Ruthless Vow because, you know, it's already the end of November, and Charming the Duke of the North, it's kind of a slow read for me. I'm not super invested into the story, so I guess we'll have to see in the November wrap up to see if I actually did finish Charming the Duke of the North. And without any further ado, let's head on over to all the actual books I read for the month of October, what I thought about them, their synopsis, and all that good stuff. My goal for this video is to limit the gap, get to the point, and be concise with what I want to say. Will I be successful? Place your bets below, and let's get right into it. The first set of books is going to be book 5 and book 6 from the Murderbot Diaries, and I listened to both of these books as an audiobook. The first book is Network Effect, and I give this a solid 5 star. I am obsessed with this book. This book is probably her best book of the entire series, but I don't really want to tell you guys what it's about because it's book 5, so I would ultimately spoil book 1 through book 4 for you all, and maybe book 5. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a synopsis as to the whole Murderbot franchise. So the Murderbot Diary is a set of novellas that follows a sentient murder bot, a bot that's designed for killing, as the name suggests, and we are set in a dystopian world where human conquered space. Think of how we had colonies on Earth. Imagine that, but on an intergalactical level. Now, specifically, the 5th book, The Network Effect, has a lot of themes surrounding friendships and found family, and also it's on the more thrilling, suspenseful side of things. I really enjoyed it. I was so engrossed into the story because I needed to know what was going to happen next in the story. This 5th book of the series is a solid 5 out of 5, and I am quite frankly emotionally invested in fictional robots. Like that's how much I like this book. I am here. I will fight to the death for these characters that showed up in this 5th book specifically. As for the 6th book in the series, Fugitive, Telemetry, I gave it a 3.5 star rating. I think I would have rated it a lot lower if I wasn't so emotionally invested in the Murderbot. This one kind of just didn't hit. It could also be read as a standalone because we didn't get much of the recurring characters we saw in book 1 through book 5. It just didn't hit as hard, especially given how good the 5th book was. So I was left hanging and wanting more. You don't need too much context as to what's happening and who the characters are for this book to work. And I think that's why it felt so off to me, because in the previous work, even though we are introduced to new characters or there are recurring characters, we get to see a little bit more in depth about them. And this one, not so much. Now, the next two reads are video game reads from the game Honkai Star Rail. The first one I'm going to talk about is Penecony Part 1, and I gave it a solid 3 stars. My friends might call me a Penecony hater, but I can't help it because I just didn't vibe with the story, and the plot felt really weak for me. So to give you guys a little bit more context for anybody who has not played Honkai Star Rail, specifically Penecony's chapter, I'm going to give you a quick synopsis as to what it's about, but not enough to spoil you if you do end up wanting to play it. So this is part 1 in a 3-part series for the arc in Penecony. So in part 1, our main character receives an invitation to go to Penecony, a world that allows you to fall asleep. Think a 5-star hotel, you fall asleep, and you end up in a dream world that allows you to fulfill any desires and any wishes you might have. So you guys can kind of think of it as a voluntary matrix, and as the story progresses, we start to uncover the dark history in Penecony along with some mysteries. So that is the general overview of what Penecony is. I think the story as a whole is pretty solid, but I feel like there were too many moving parts that really requires you to pay really close attention to what's happening and what can lead on to the next. I think it could have been done better, but what really nailed the 3-star rating to this whole part 1 world is the fact that the writer really forced an interaction between the main character and another character in the story, and I felt like it just didn't mesh very well. And I do believe they did this primarily because that character is a character that you can purchase in the game, and they want you to have some sort of emotional connection to the purchasable character, so you would go out of your way and buy it. But because they did that, things were moving too fast between the main character and this new character that was introduced, I want to say like 20 pages ago, and then suddenly we're best friends, we're giving them advice, and she's trauma dumping on us. It just didn't click to me, and I didn't really enjoy that. I felt like it was a very forced experience and ruined the whole story and the whole vibe for me. So Penecony, unfortunately, is a solid 3-star rating, mostly because of the forced character interaction. However, that doesn't mean I don't like a character-driven story, even if it's meant to entice us to purchase the character. So in this case, in Homecoming Wardance, we have another playable character where we start to learn more about her backstory and history, and Homecoming Wardance did such a better job with its story to weave this playable character into the story so that it doesn't feel forced or rushed. So Homecoming Wardance, you guys could kind of think of it as a novella set place in the same universe as the rest of the Honkai Star Rail series, and Homecoming Wardance specifically is our main character receiving an invitation. Yes, our main character receives a lot of invitation to participate in stuff because they're the main character, and this invitation is an invitation to participate in a cross-world competition where warriors come out and try to beat each other to get the winning title of the strongest in this cross-world event. Of course, it's not some kind of story without some conflicts involved, and because our main character is the main character, they get roped into an adventure trying to resolve some of the conflict that arises during their stay at this cross-world competition. And this was a solid 5-star read. I felt like the story was really solid. We got a lot of backstory on the world itself that's hosting this cross-world event, and on top of that, we got the history of the race of the people that live there, along with some tragedy that has happened in the past, and how all of that connects to the banner character, aka the character that was currently for sale during this arc of the story. And so I just thought that that execution was so much better than the execution of Penecony Part 1 that I couldn't help but just enjoy it a little bit more. I enjoyed learning a lot more about the backstory of the world, the backstory of the character, and the backstory of the people that lived on this world as well. So a solid 5-star read. Honkai Star Rail definitely has some really good execution of character selling and then some really bad execution of character selling. And before you guys ask, yes, I did purchase the character. They got me. Now the next 4 books are books that I read during my birthday reading vlog, so go ahead and check that out if you guys want more details. But otherwise, I'm gonna try to be quick and concise with the next 4 books. The first one being Better Than the Movies. I listened to this on audiobook and I gave it a solid 4-star rating. This book was actually an original recommendation from Jada at JMO Reads, and I thought it was a fairly well-written book, and I really liked the character depth and the character growth inside the book. However, I will have to say it really does feel like an immature high school love, so if you're not into that, it might be really hard to get into it. I definitely need to put myself in the correct mindset before I really started to enjoy this book. The synopsis for Better Than the Movie is that it follows our main character Liz as she comes up with the most extreme, crazy tactics so that she could get the perfect prom date to fulfill her rom-com dream. And she even ropes along her arch nemesis neighbor to help her achieve this. And of course, per usual, the arch nemesis neighbor, yeah, she doesn't want to go to prom with him. She's using him to have the perfect meet cute, the perfect rom-com-esque like prom date with someone else. Now, the story is definitely a very cute high school contemporary romance with underlining themes of grief and coming of age. The last half of the book definitely is what really solidified its 4-star mark for me. The first half can be a little bit rough to get into, but like I said, if you can set your mindset to realize that this is a high school teenager, I feel like it would definitely be a lot more bearable. Now, the next book is an unexpected release from Ali Hazelwood, and it is Two Can Play, and I gave it a solid 3.25 star rating, and I listened to this on audio because that is the only format available for this book. This is a quick, short romance following two games developers who are working for competing companies, and in classic Ali Hazelwood fashion, they are once again enemies to lovers, where in the beginning, it really does seem like they despise each other. However, they will have to work with each other because they are given a chance, a once-in-a-lifetime chance, to work together on a video game that both of them love. So how will their romance play out? You can kind of already guess. Story-wise, I just felt like it was less solid than I would have liked, and it's not really a story that I feel the need to flip back to or will be willing to purchase it once it gets released in a physical format. The next book I read was Woman of Light, and I gave this a 3.5 stars, and I listened to this on audio. I read this as a buddy read with Maria Andrea at Books and Bookadillos for Spanish Heritage Month. And I really liked the story, but what really fell off for me is the fact that because I listened to it on audio, and I know this after talking to Maria Andrea about the book, is that the audio really makes it seem like a lot of disconnected stories, and that's where it just didn't click for me. Even though the voice actress and the narrator did such a fantastic and wonderful job, even though the author did a fantastic job writing the story, I just felt like the way I consumed it made it really feel like individual snippets of life, and I almost didn't get a sense on how all that connected. On top of that, the ending kind of left me with wanting more. That really affected the rating a little bit, in my opinion, because all of these big things happen and we're left with the hanging moment of like, now what? What's next? Like, I really wanted more. And in this book, we saw a lot of themes surrounding race, racism, segregation, and a little bit of misogyny, specifically towards the indigenous people of the land in the 1900s. And honestly, I felt like this is a really enlightening read because I felt like the author did such a wonderful job about depicting this, creating a work of fiction that's based on history and allowing me to kind of understand better about the history of America and the land that it's built on. I think I would have rated this closer to a 4 if I were to read it, but I ended up receiving it as an audiobook first, and that's what I ultimately read with. And because of that, I am saddened that I didn't get to really see the cohesiveness of everything, and it's definitely something that I want to reread in the future in a different format to see if my opinions and my thought change with the different format. The last book I finished on my birthday reading vlog is The King of Sloth, which is the 4th book in the King of Sin series. This book specifically follows a lazy playboy billionaire and a calm, cool, collected, hardworking publicist that's trying to keep him out of trouble so he can get his inheritance. Now, plot events happen, things happen, and they somehow end up finding solace with each other. So for me, this book, I think, is one of the more solid Anna Huang books, specifically in the character depth and the character history. I really like Sloane's history, and I really like backstory on her family a lot. And Xavier, with his power struggle between him and his dad and the company and the legacy that his dad left behind and his need to fulfill it, but he doesn't want to do it. I think this book is definitely on the more solid end of things in terms of backstory for an Anna Huang billionaire King of Sin series. So I gave this a solid 4-star read. The only thing I have to say is, Anna Huang, do you do the things you write in here? Because help, I would never. One of the scenes in here has Sloane doing something that you will never catch me doing. I'm sorry, but a shoe? But a shoe? I'm just gonna leave you guys with that, and you guys can take it however you want to take it. Now, the last book that I read kind of on my reading vlog is Marriage Convenience, and I gave this a solid 5 stars for the whole series and including all of the 23 or so side chapters. I actually started reading this back in November of 2023, and the whole series has finally been completed and translated into English, and this book was spectacular. This book is probably the only age gap marriage of convenience book that I will ever read. I don't think any other book with those two tropes specifically will ever work, but this book made it work so well without any of the sussy factors that comes into play with age gap and marriage of convenience. Now, the whole manhwa is over 150 chapters if I recall correctly, so here's my little synopsis to give you guys an introduction to the story so you guys could have a little bit more of an idea about what the story is about. So the story follows our main female protagonist Bianca, who receives a second chance at around 30 years old to relive her life at the age of 19. When given the second chance, she wants to make sure to right her wrongs from her first life and also fulfill God's request on ensuring that the Duke of Arnold, her husband, will survive through the war this time. This story just has such great character growth, character depiction, and a slow progression of romance. I love this, and even the side stories just don't feel like fluff or filler, but they are the consequences of the previous actions that has been done in the main chapter. And I really like the fact that the author took on a more serious tone for the side chapters. It really felt like I got an additional set of plot on top of the plot that we already received in the main story. So a solid 5-star read. I will have to give a slight trigger warning. It does contain child marriage. The marriage between our female protagonist and our male protagonist is quite suspicious. They have a huge age gap, and she was married to him when she was very young. However, there's no sussy elements to this because he's almost never at home. He's always off on the battlefield, and the author did a really good job of creating the story and the setting for it to work, such as our female lead being actually 34 years old because she regressed from 34 back to 19. And in fact, I really like the fact that they called it out and used this example of a marriage and abolished all child marriages in the kingdom at the end of the story. So little tidbits to keep in mind. I definitely didn't know if I wanted to read it at first until I read the comments and got a little bit more context around the story, that I realized that it's actually a pretty well handled situation. Now, my only nonfiction read for the month of October is What My Bones Know, and I gave this a solid 5-star read and I listened to it on audio. This is once again a recommendation from Lauren at Love Lauren, and her recommendation never seems to miss. This book is extremely detailed with a lot of information to unpack. Now, on a very surface synopsis about this book, it is an autobiography following Fu and her journalistic approach into getting more information about complex PTSD, which she was recently diagnosed with. And a really big part of all of this, and a really big part of the reason why she's taking all this journalistic approach and all this research, is because there's not enough research, data, information, published work surrounding complex PTSD. Honestly, this book has a lot to unpack, but something that really stood out to me personally on my first read through is this familial toxicity surrounding the label of model minority and how Asian immigrant kids have to deal with their parents' toxicity and the abuse that many Asian immigrant kids go through but endure because of the sacrifices that their parents have made in order to get them to America. For me, that's one part that's extremely relatable, and for her, that played into her complex PTSD as well. Another fascinating piece of research that she mentioned in her book that I personally want to look into more is how trauma to your parents or grandparents can actually physically alter your DNA. I think that's fascinating, and I just want to understand a little bit more. I'm curious as to what causes the shift in the DNA and see if there's any more research on that as well. Another big point of relatability is her struggle with finding a good therapist or psychologist. The very first layer is that the special one with more in-depth specialties tend to not take insurance because insurance will make you jump through loophole and will think that they know more than you do as the doctor. That's a really big thing about healthcare insurance. But then also the fact that the ones that are insured will tend to try to take you anyways and morph your diagnoses to what fits their specialty. There's also that layer of convolutedness where when you go to someone, it might not be the 100% accurate diagnoses you should have been given, but they'll take that and morph it into what their specialty is and use that to diagnose you. Then you might end up in a place where kind of the sets of goals and actions they give you might not be the best for your situation. And then the last part, which I 100% relate to, is sometimes if you seem to be successful successful on paper, they would just dismiss any inquiries or any suspicion you might have about yourself. Specifically for me, back in 2020, I talked with my general physician and she determined that I should talk to a psychologist to get a more in-depth look about what is going on with my mental health. And quite frankly, this guy spent 10 minutes with me and said, no, you don't have anything. No, nothing's wrong with you. You can't be depressed. You can't be anxious. You probably don't have whatever your doctor sent you to me for. All because I went to a prestigious college, graduated from the said college, and was able to hold a job for more than 3 years. That's all he needed to know. And then he was just like, nope, you're fine. You're just overthinking things. Get out. And I'm just saying that our healthcare system as a whole needs to be fixed. Or at least some of the physicians need to be double checked and looked at. Yes, I'm still pretty angry and mad about that one particular psychologist and everything that has happened. Overall, I think this is a really enlightening read. She had a lot of very good facts and information, and I highly recommend picking up the audio along with the book or listen to it as an audio at some point because she does a really good job narrating her life, and she even includes direct snippets from her therapy appointments into the audiobook, which just added another layer for us to be able to delve in and delve deeper into the information. Highly recommend it. 10 out of 10. Lauren, you never fail. The next set of books are going to be rough, so hold on to your seat. And for the very first time on my channel, we have a murder psychological thriller. Are you ready to know what the rating is going to be? I know a couple of you guys really enjoy this book, but unfortunately, I gave it 1 star. I listened to this as an audiobook, and also I have the physical version to read along. And I DNF'd this back in November 2023 when I was first getting into the groove of reading again, and I DNF'd it at the 23% mark. However, now, almost a full year later, I want to give this book a fair shot. So I picked it up again, and this time I added an audiobook with it just to kind of make the progress go a little bit faster, and it just didn't click for me. I did not enjoy this book at all. So The Silent Patient is a first-person POV of a psychologist who, quite frankly, has an infatuation with a famous artist who is a suspected murderer of her husband. And the reason why the book is called The Silent Patient is because this suspected murderer is actually now silent after the murder of her husband. So they never got confirmation if she was the one who killed him, but she got off with reason of insanity and is locked up in a psych ward. Most of the story is in the perspective of the psychologist with a diary entry from Alicia, and in the story, it feels like the psychologist wants to be an investigator of some sort to figure out why Alicia killed her husband. Now for me, the story and the twist just did not click. It did not work for me. It is really giving a vibe of a particular book. It's really trying to emulate that particular book, and it did not execute it well. And I'm trying to be vague to not spoil anyone who has not read this book, but for me the twist didn't quite work because the situations that were brought up in the book should have revealed the twist much earlier than this. But the way that the author wrote it, it almost felt like he was purposefully omitting something that shouldn't even be omitted in the first place, because we're reader, we're omnipotent in this storyline, right? So there's no real point for these omission to be forcefully handled that way. And because of that, it just didn't make for a good plot. It just had me at moments going like, what? That doesn't make sense, because when I flip back to pages before, I'm just like, this should have revealed the plot right then and there. Why was it purposefully omitted? Like, it just didn't make sense for it to be omitted in that text because we're omnipotent as the reader, right? Personally, for me, I like mysteries that leave clues throughout the book where when we finally get to the twist at the end, we can kind of pick up on it from the previous context. I really don't like left field twists just for the pure fact of the shock factor. That doesn't do it for me. So for me, The Silent Patient was a solid 1 star. I'm keeping it as 1 star because it was originally a DNF, and I think I would have kept it as a DNF if it's not for the fact that I really want to get into thrillers and mysteries. The next book I read for the month of October is Reckless, and I listened to this both on audio and I had a physical copy to read, and I gave this book 3 stars. I can't give you guys much information about Reckless without spoiling the first book or the series as a whole, but quite honestly, there was no plot to spoil you guys. Quite honestly, if you took this map you see here at the beginning and you drew out where our characters end up back and forth, you would see like multiple circles across the map because they were literally running in circles. Kai and Peyton were running in circles. Their dialogues were running in circles. I really liked Kai and Peyton in the first book, but this book, quite honestly, you could read the first 20% and the last 20%, and you would get the general gist of the book. And as much as I like Kai and Peyton, I don't think I wanted the same scenes reenacted again and again and again. Honestly, the middle 40% of this book, I almost wanted to create a bingo card because the same sequence of events happen, and I can guarantee you it'll start with a tussle, they'll have some hand-to-hand combat, one of them will pin each other to some kind of surfaces, and then a surprise knife pointing at each other's throat. Those four things will inevitably happen in the same context again and again and again and again in the 40% mark of the book. However, the last 20% of the book really saved it from being a 1 to 2 star because the plot really thickens at the last 20% of the book, and Lauren Roberts left us on an amazing cliffhanger. I just felt a similar vibe to Jessie in this book, where it felt like a filler book where it's just trying to get us from point A to point B. But a really big reason why I rated it so low was because I was listening to this as an audiobook while grinding a game, which is basically means I'm playing the game but I'm doing some tedious task that's very repetitive. So on top of doing something very repetitive on my game, I was listening to the same repetitive action in the story, and I guess it just didn't click well. I didn't like it, and I ended up wanting to DNF it at some point, but I pushed through, and I'm kind of glad I did because now I really want to know what happens in the third book, and hopefully the third book will have more plot and less filler. Now we are on to our final book of October, and it is The Friend Zone by Abby Jimenez, and I gave this book a shocking 1-star rating along with a DNF at the 31% mark. I listened to this as an audiobook, and I don't think me reading it would have saved it at all because plot-wise, I just did not vibe with the story. I just did not vibe with the characters, and I genuinely don't think this is what a good romance should be based off of. And I think this is a hard personal line for me just because I don't think any romances that start off like this will give me that happily ever after feeling. Trust me, I was also very shook when I had to DNF an Abby Jimenez book because up until this point, I really thought she was an auto-buy author for me. So imagine my surprise when I had to DNF a book. But luckily, I do think that this is her first book and she has made a lot of improvements since then. I feel like she has done a lot more research into anything that she includes in her book now, and I really appreciate her for that because I feel like she's really taking in all the constructive criticism that she has received in this book. Now, the synopsis we were given for the book is pretty innocent at first glance. It's this cool tomboy girl who meets a guy that's going to be the best man at her best friend's wedding. They meet, sparks fly, and the crux of the plot is that he wants to have a really big family and she cannot. Now, I can't explain why I didn't like this book without going to a spoilers territory, but honestly, I wish I knew about this before I read the book because I wouldn't have even picked it up if I knew this was part of the book. And the big part of the book that made me auto DNF it is the fact that our female lead is basically cheating with our male lead. So their romance starts off with them cheating with each other. And I personally don't think I can ever think of a romance as a happily ever after if there's cheating involved. I don't think it's a good start to a romance whatsoever. Our female lead has a long-term, long-distance boyfriend who's about to move in with her, and prior to moving in with him, she meets our male lead, and the thought she has is pretty wild, and she clearly has this attraction towards him, and instead of nipping in the bud, they basically spend a lot of time together that can be almost construed as dates. Our male lead is not any better because he knows she has a long-distance, long-term boyfriend, and yet he still kind of makes moves on her. I mean, Abby Jimenez tries to say like, oh, they're just friends, oh, I would never cheat, but at the point of the 30% mark, you're past the emotional cheating point and skimming the line of physical cheating. And I had to end the book when she sits on his lap and they were about to kiss. At that point, I felt like our main character should have just called it off with her long-term boyfriend. And to make matters worse, she only didn't want to break up with her long-term boyfriend because she knew the male lead wanted a big family and she can't have a big family, so she defaults to her long-term boyfriend. What kind of logic is that? That is so bad. Like, I cannot root for a female lead like that. That is not okay. Maybe that's not one-to-one as to what she said, but that's the general gist I got out of what she said, and I just didn't like it at all. And my DNF mark was when they almost kissed while sitting on his lap. There is no room where why would you sit on someone's lap that you have actual interest and attraction to? It makes no sense to me. Like, I might be extreme, but I just feel like that's bordering cheating on my part. Like, it's already past the emotional cheating point, and it's bordering the line of physical cheating, if not already past it for me. So unfortunately, I had to DNF this book. Nothing about it screamed like it's a good romance. I don't want a romance built off of a cheating relationship. That just doesn't sit well with me. I think that is it in terms of spoilers. All aside, I do think this book has a bit of misogyny, especially a woman's choice to choose to sterilize herself in order to have a better quality of life, and then the fact of the woman needing to have kids in order to have a happy ever after. So there's that layer of misogyny that I also didn't really like. Overall, I was pretty surprised that this is an Abby Jimenez book, but I'm also really happy to have read her latest book releases first, then this one, because I don't know if I would have kept reading her if this was my first introduction to Abby Jimenez. And I really do think that she has improved on her writing a tremendous amount, and I think I'm going to continue supporting her new books until I read something that just doesn't sit with me well. And that is it for my October monthly wrap-up, the concise, quick, and to-the-point edition. Hopefully, that is what it is. Let me know down in the comment section if your bet was successful or not. And if you have made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you spending the time listening to me yap about all the books that I read for October. And as usual, if you guys enjoyed this video, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next week for another video. Bye!